Just checking for quorum. I think we're right, aren't we? Okay, so we'll resume the meeting, and thank you for patience, because it's important that we get this right. So just a couple of little wording changes within Ken's amendment, which he is okay with, and I believe Kieran's okay with it. Is that correct, Kieran?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So just going to ask, before Ken speaks to it, we'll ask Barry to lead off with some comments.
Thank you, Chair. And if I might just speak to the advice from officers on Council's response to those properties impacted by the damaged road reserves, and certainly Murray and Mace and Craig are here to speak to that more and address it. First out, look, it is clear and recognised that the property owners find themselves in a very difficult situation. All accepted that, and there are thousands of homeowners around Auckland who have been impacted by the events of last year and have to do repairs on their properties. This particular situation is quite complex, and some of that is set out, and I'm sure it'll be spoken to as well. It's to do with that land ownership in road reserves. It makes these situations more difficult for homeowners to resolve on their own. There have been frequent meetings between staff, and they've worked together to try and find solutions within the boundaries of Council's roles and funding. There are clear established responsibilities for assets and activities in the road reserve that are nationally consistent and supported by case law. Like any private landowner, Council has a duty of care towards its neighbours. However, Council is not responsible for the results of natural hazards. Taking guidance from case law, Council typically investigates the issue and informs neighbours if there are actions that need to be taken. Council is not required to make repairs in the road reserve and is not funded to do so. Stepping aside from those parameters, risks setting a precedent that is not funded in our regular business or by our main funding partner, NZTA, remain and are high. Both NZTA and Cyclone Recovery Unit have made it clear that they will not provide funding for this work. If the Council provides funding, officers have identified that there is a high risk of established precedents or expectations that would apply to other natural damage hazard in the future. Should councillors decide that they do want to take action in these limited circumstances, officers suggest a capped scheme. That the criteria to address the unique circumstances of these cases can be developed, limiting the scheme to the North Island weather event and associated funding, and to situations where the impacts have significantly reduced access to the adjoining home. There is a fund of $5 million available. Anything outside of that would have to be funded privately. However, and this is a key point, this is not likely to reduce the risks associated with precedents or setting expectations, and that's something that councillors will need to consider in your deliberations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Barry. Leading off, Ken, with your amendment, do you want to speak to it first before we go into questions?
Yes, please, Mr. Chair. So thank you very much for this opportunity. This is a continuation of our motion, my notice of motion a month ago, and we decided at the end of that the principle was good, but we needed time to just work out the budget, if there was one, what it could be, and the facts, the parameters around the problems. What's up there is what I'm proposing is on top of the chair's recommendations. There's been a tsunami of verbiage in the last 24 hours, and in which we've all been discussing the what if, oblivious to the what is. And the what is the situation these people find themselves in. And it's the council's, we all buy into this council family and pay our rates for the collective better of us all and of the system, the roading system, the pathing system, the piping system we live in. I think what they've got here is, functionality. That's what's missing. These people have been sitting with no functionality for the last 22 months. And we're doing repairs around the place ourselves, slip repairs, and we're getting all our consents in retrospect. We are saying this is an emergency. We need to get these matters fixed fast. These people have been living an emergency for the last 22 months. And so my amendment really is just on top of your recommendations, Mr. Chair, but I'm putting back the ability for the for the 5 million to be spent on capital and not locked onto just the consenting and the academic. And I know there's all sorts of designs and all that sort of stuff and that we have to plan these things, but Auckland Transport put that second and put the capital expenditure of getting the asset fixed first. And I'm asking us to do that today for these people. I'm just saying, let's make this so that we can get that 5 million to cost-effective outcomes on the ground for all parties. And it's not just a private gain from this. There is, in almost all cases, there is a public improvement element as well. I think we've hammered this to death in many ways. I've written so many notes here that I can't really go back to because the local board and the presenters did such a good job of presenting concisely the issue. This is the humanity I'm talking to. So I'd like you to vote to accept my amendment, which puts onto the recommendations, which puts the $5 million back to be able to be spent on capital spending, not just locked into the council process part. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ken. So I'll now hand over to the staff and they can speak to the report.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, just want to acknowledge again, as Barry has already done, the hardship on these property owners, and do want to acknowledge the STAR group in terms of the advocacy. Thibaut, Tony, Rachel and Catherine particularly have led this, and we've worked closely with them, particularly Auckland Transport, and I know they've been grateful for the Auckland Transport interface. As officers, we have an obligation to present the issues as we understand it impacts council, in terms of the way the bylaws, the policies that we currently have in place, and the greater good for the ratepayers of Auckland, and that's where this report comes from. It is a very difficult situation. I mean, the main issue that we face is that these repairs are difficult to split in terms of responsibilities. If they sit across Auckland Transport, Auckland Council, and the adjacent property owners. For the council group, repairing road reserves for private benefit or funding adjacent homeowners to undertake such repairs runs contrary to our current practice, and therefore anything we do here does run the risk, as Barry identified, of creating precedent. There is money available, as has been identified. Auckland Transport can speak to that better than I can. We have recommended in 25 of our report some criteria around the scope of what we should be considering in this process. And certainly, our major recommendation initially was around providing the level of support through a case management type process, which would include the consenting process, the licensing processes, and so on, to support homeowners in their work through remediating the issues on their properties. One of the things we are mindful of is the fact that while Star Group have been fantastic in terms of advocating for their group, and that's all credit to them, we have had a number of other people, individuals and groups come to us and say, hey, we're also impacted and need to be a part of this, and that is a challenge for us. We have quoted in the report, if we were to repair and remediate all issues on council repaired land in terms of parks and community facilities, there's about a $60 million cost to that. The costs could be considerable if we look to extend the scheme across a wider network. I will probably leave it there because I think the document speaks for itself, unless there's anything, Mr. Chair, you'd like me to touch on that I've missed. I'll take the report as read.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, Murray, you need to add? Okay, so open for questions. Desley.
Thanks, Chair. My first question is, do we have the 5 million? But you've just answered that, so that's yes. My second question, and this seems to be the sort of sticking point that in the short time, and thank you, Chair, for letting us have the break, is between the 5 million to be used for capital works or non-capital works. In your report, in point 55, one of your options for us to help talks about a contribution towards the funding of their repairs. So am I correct in saying in your report that you're saying that the 5 million could be used for capital works as an option?
As an option, yes, it could be.
Great. Okay, thank you. And my second question, if you want to help as many people as you can, because the two recommendations are very similar. Capital works is one. You've said that it's one of your options to help. So are you saying if you want to help as many people you can, and I know that this is a non-precedent setting response, what would you suggest in your advice would be the best thing to do?
The money is limited. Obviously, we're talking. Sorry, Councillor. Thank you for that question. The money is capped, or is limited, not capped. Sorry, it's limited. We know there is a $5 million surplus, give or take, through AT. They've identified that. $5 million across capital improvements or remediation is, how far is that going to go? We have different numbers. We've Auckland Transport believe of the 37 affected properties, it's about 6.8 million. I think I've got that number right, thereabouts, to remediate. Star Group have identified sort of 15 to 20 million across the issues that they would like addressed. I guess the answer to your question, Councillor, is that if we limited it to covering the costs of design, of consents, of licensing and the likes, obviously we'd be able to spread it across a much wider group of individuals, benefit more people than if we were looking at assets, at physical improvements only.
Thank you, Christine. Chris.
Thanks, team. Thanks, Craig. Just on the paragraph 11, Craig, and you've got a lot of experience in this area from your former role. Would you expand on the second sentence? This could create significant financial risk. You've used the word significant for Auckland Council and ratepayers as it could set a precedent. So I'd like you to just dwell on significant financial risk, the precedent setting, and the many other circumstances. Would you expand on that, please?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. And it comes back, I guess, to the point I made earlier on around, where do you draw the line on where public property has been impacted through the weather events, which were unprecedented, and our infrastructure, regardless, couldn't mitigate those issues. But if we start looking at the wider range of the likes of Esplanade reserves, parks and reserves, other properties where there's where access into a property has been impacted. We don't have a number, but it would be significant in terms of cost if we applied the same rules across everyone.
So I'm not sure whether you have this information, Craig, but a lot of the coastal cliffs of the North Shore, you'll be familiar with, they had esplanade reserves on the coastal side. Our asset, they collapsed, exposing private assets. Did any part of the council contribute costs for the remediation or anything in that area?
In the main, no. The only area where money has been invested is where it's fallen into the buyout scheme or the categorisation scheme. So, for instance, a 2P scenario where there might have been a retaining wall or a stapling issue available to a homeowner to protect their property.
Just going back to the chair's recommendations, I think it's okay to discuss amendment plus the originals. In terms of the identification of the $5 million to support consenting and licensing, can you just give us a sense of what that benefit might be to individual property owners and how far that might spread from your understanding of the problem we've got now and the identified properties that we have now? There may be more. Can you just give us an idea of how far that might benefit? What sort of numbers are we looking at for consenting and licensing?
Yeah,
an early indication?
Councillor, I can't give you a quantified answer to that. I'm sorry. I mean, it will depend on the circumstances of individual properties, how much is involved in terms of consenting and so on. So we haven't done an in-depth, detailed look at each of these properties yet to understand what those costs might be. We've done a sort of a thumbsuck, or Auckland Transport have done a thumbsuck on what they think the physical repair work might cost, but that's all. I'm sorry.
Okay, and is there an equal risk of precedent setting there, or is it a different exposure if we went with the chair's recommendation?
The details of the scheme, we'll call it a scheme, still need to be determined, and we'd certainly be looking at it from a precedent-setting situation to make sure we avoid that. There are other scenarios where we have provided money to various bodies to support a situation like this. So, again, not giving you a straight answer, I'm sorry, but there'd be more work to be done.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Chris. Joe?
Oh, thank you. If we go ahead with this, and in order for the property owners to fix their private property, they need the public property to be fixed. Will this cover it? And then who will carry out that public property fix?
So thank you, Councillor. I think, again, because we are still working through, what would be the cost of remediation and how we allocate those funds, that has to be determined if it was a case where we were also funding the remediation. The second part of your question was around the...
In order for the property owners to, benefit from this scheme and fix their private property, what if they need the public property to be fixed? Will this scheme then cover that private property?
That's the intent. So
okay.
It's looking at allowing them to at least access the start of their private property, where those costs would then fall on the property owner to do the remediation. So this is what we're talking about here is the public land component and the road reserve only. We're not looking to extend into funding private driveways and so on, private property.
Oh yeah, and that's very clear. They said this isn't about fixing their private property, it's about fixing the public side. So are we in essence saying that we want the public to fix council-owned assets? And what is the health and safety risk there?
So it is private benefit on public land. So the funds, the $5 million comes out of rate-funded money through the storm recovery budget. So it does fall back on the ratepayer. So your question around who would do the work, that's again a topic that we could discuss in terms of can we utilise Auckland Transport's procurement contracts and so on now, where the responsibility would still sit with the private owner in terms of their liability, but the work can be carried out in the most effective and efficient way through Auckland Transport contracts potentially.
That's good to hear. So the work will be carried out by Auckland Transport. contractors.
by contracts
Contractors.
under the contract terms that Auckland Transport may have in place, but again, to be determined. Would you like to speak to that, Mark?
Yeah, I think that's going to a level of detail that's too defined to be able to answer here. There would be a range of options. Maybe just to outline what normally happens, if any person is normally buying a property, building a new house, and then applying to put an access in, the driveway access to any new property is at the expense of the private person and is constructed by their contractor, and they apply for a license to be able to do that work within the road reserve.
Thanks, Joe. Julie.
Thank you. I'm just trying to get my head around the difference between the two amendments. I think I'm understanding a bit better now from the comments from staff, but I think this is probably a question more for the mover and seconder. In regard to crossing those words out in A, is the intention then that work, which is the case manager, contract procurement specialist, consent specialist, variety of non-CAPEX work, is the intention that be funded separately from the $5 million fund? And if so, where from?
So, yeah, I can answer that. It was my understanding that the offer of those support people was contingent. It was coming. It was no cost, and the council could manage that and deliver that. My intention was the top words were just taken out because they weren't needed when we made the amendment to B. And again, the intention was just to get to get the capital, to get the $5 million available for the capital, because in realities, spending on the capital works for the emergency situation is the best way and the fastest way to get to recovery. That's what Auckland Transport's already pointed out. It's their way of doing it.
Okay, so can I just check with staff then? So we can fund the A stuff without, looks like you might have to have a chat about that. Okay, that's all right. Yeah, the rest of my questions are probably for staff. Thanks for prioritising that, for answering that, Ken.
Perhaps, Councillor Ferry, if I ask it, we aren't funded to provide an unlimited navigation service, and consenting fees, we're not funded for that either. And also the licence encroachment costs of processing those aren't funded either. So it would be an impact within existing budgets.
Okay, so in the original that you've got, Andy, the intention was that some, perhaps not all, of the funding to do the stuff in A came from the $5 million fund. And by crossing those lines out, we now have to find that money from somewhere else. Is that correct?
That would be correct.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. The next question I have is just, and obviously we can't quantify that because we don't know. Yeah, okay. The other question I have is around if we do the $5 million for repairs, for CAPEX only, and not for the consenting and licensing and so on, how long will it take us to come up with a scheme to prioritise those? Because I imagine we probably can't fund all of the projects from that $5 million, and decisions will need to be made about whether every project that meets the criteria gets a proportion, whether some projects get fully funded. How long will that take? I'm really concerned about some of the timing with this.
Councillor, we would have to go and do that work. We could prioritise it, obviously, at the direction of the CEs. I guess we would, or this council, we would make sure that we tried to get something as concrete as possible in place, within, I think, leaving enough wiggle room to obviously create to give some flexibility to the program. So
comparing that with if that fund is instead used for resourcing, consenting, the more OPEX-y grants, how long will it take to set up a scheme that allows for that?
It'd be a lot quicker.
A lot quicker.
And a lot of that's in place already. It's just finding the resource to be able to navigate it.
Okay, so I guess that's something for consideration is we don't know how long it would take to set up a CapEx scheme, whereas we could relatively quickly set up an OPEX scheme. Is that a fair?
No, that's fair. And yeah, we've talked equity already, Councillor, and that's something that lens would have to apply, which could take some time.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Thanks.
Just if I may clarify a bit more too, Mr. Chairman, we would have to consider that across the region, so it will be potentially an expression of interest process which could extend that process quite significantly.
Just clarify that. So you're meaning that if the B money, it's just for the sake of simplicity, the B money, if that is if that is used to do the stuff in A, the OPEX stuff, then it will apply to the properties that are already identified. But if we make B a CapEx thing, we will need to open it up for others who may have similar claims. Is that?
I think it's both. So
It's both. Okay.
we would need to consider an equity sense. It's not just only the properties currently identified, but
Yep.
there may be other properties. So more people would benefit.
And so that's regardless of whether B is the 5 million is OPEX or CapEx. You still need to do
That's
that.
correct. It's capped. So
Okay. So we're still going to have to prioritise. Okay. Thank you. That's really useful for me.
Thanks, Julie. Greg?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. A few questions. Just, I haven't got my calculator with me, but if we took 5 million divided by the 37 properties, how much is that per property? Can somebody got?
I think
135,135
Okay, so 135 grand. So this is my questions are going to be around, just to put this in context, is once that pool, and Ken, good on you for putting this up, by the way, and I want to try and support this, but I have just some questions around it for the officers, okay? So, and one of them is around how far 5 million is going to go. So first question, I've got about 4, maybe 5 questions. So at the moment, we've got a pool of 5 million. In the paper, it says at least 6.3 is going to be spent on to cover the 37 properties. More likely to be 40 to 50 properties. I think I heard you say that somebody might have been 5-star, could have estimated a cost up to 20 million, right? So once that 5 million's gone, and the true cost at the end of the day, when we press the green light and this comes up to 20 mil, where's the difference come from?
Yeah, through the chair, it would have to come from the private landowners, and this is part of the challenge we have. We know that it's not going to go far enough. A point I would make that Star have been very clear on is that the 37 properties, and just correct me if I'm wrong, apply to access only properties. That's the whole lot. Sorry, that is all of them. Okay. So, yeah, because that has been I guess an area of contention is we're recommending access only. Star are recommending all impacted land.
Well, I'll try and put this in a question. Because once you deal with those priority ones, which will be the access ones, you've got to wonder how much of the 5 mil's left, right? So, and some people are going to miss out. Some people in this room are going to miss out. So, if the 5 mil just goes straight into CapEx, right, it's only spent on capital improvements, what other incidental costs are they going to be, whether, around, I don't know how it works proportionally. So say you spend 5 mil on the capital works, how much other costs are there in terms of the consenting, licensing, design fees, et cetera? Can you give me a feel for that? I mean, it's going to be a guess, but from experience.
I would hate to put a number against that, Councillor, I'm afraid. I mean, it will depend on the case by case. I mean, some cases you might be looking at $20,000 for a consent. Others it might be a lot less, but I really can't. I can't give you a number. Sorry.
I guess, okay, but it's on top. I guess that's my concern. And can I just delve into the area of design? So, if we wanted to really spread this money, so each of those 37, maybe up to 50 landowners, get some sort of support from Auckland Council rather than a handful of people getting the whole 5 mil spent on their remediation work on the public land. Part of that would be, before you go into capital works, normally, and I was listening to Councillor Turner's comments, you'd get pre-design. Right? So what's the opportunity for me as a landowner that, and I'm putting myself in somebody's shoes here, that before I have to go and spend that extra money, because the money will be gone, I've got to find the extra, before I go to the bank or whatever I have to do to get that, the opportunity to have a rate funded pre-design given to me, warts and all, so I know roughly what the cost is going to be that I have to bear. So I guess what I'm saying in terms of your other amendment there, if it covered pre-design work as well, consent licensing pre-design, it might put a number of people in a position where they can make a more informed decision about how much they could be up for once that 5 mil's burnt away. So are you able to help me out there with any comment?
At the end of the day, we'll take direction from council. I mean, if I use the example of the 2P scheme, we provide a fund, a grant of $5,000 for people to go away and do their predetermined work, but that comes out of the quantum of what we invest back into the property, 25%. So it's still a cost to the homeowner by way of another means, if that makes sense. So yeah, I mean that we're getting into detail again here in terms of the scheme, but that's something that could perhaps be considered.
I think those covers my questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. And I think the intent is that we put as much support alongside that we can and could include that. So that would be the intent. Morris.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'm struggling to know exactly what's going on. My preference would be that we get a little bit better information and take it to a governing body. But if we're going to be doing it today, let me ask a question because it's been bugging me. The Deputy Mayor raised a solution which I thought had real sense to it last time we discussed it. Why don't we just say to those that it is meaningful, it won't be in every case, that little strip of land or that little embankment or whatever was owned by us or by AT and so on is really never going to be used for anything at all. It's actually just superfluous. We'll let you buy it for $1. Becomes added to your property title and it's yours and you go away and sort it out. Have we explored that at all? Because I think in many cases that I've seen, there's just an embankment that's never going to be used in a million years. It's just going to sit there on our books and we could just say to the property owner, you want to fix everything and that's the thing that's stopping you. Here, $1, it's yours.
Yeah, through the chair, that has been considered, councillor. The biggest concern we have is we lose control of the ability to do any future work in that space. You know, should we want to realign or make improvements?
Yeah, but the trouble is, it's a little bit like people who hoard stuff. Oh, I'll keep it just in case I need it. And 70 years later, when they're at their funeral, the cupboards are full of stuff they've never used all that time. It would be much better if you had to have a bit of rigour about why you may use it and when you would use it, rather than, well, we just might. Because it just seems to me, I've only seen all those pictures last time around. What the hell would you ever do with that strip? What would you ever do with that bit of embankment? What would we ever do with any of it? And yet that's the thing that's causing the problem for the private landowner. And it just seems to me, why don't we just get in, and it won't be in every case, I guarantee there'll be something, no, that can't be done in that one. But we'd get a lot of these off the books really fast and we'd be getting, you know, up to $20 in eventually. It'd be cool, eh?
Councillor, look, again, we'd probably need to come back to you with more detail, but one of the other considerations is the cost of stopping that road, if that's what we have to do. So we tell it to a private landowner, we have to stop it.
Well, I was hoping we would get something about that today because that was raised by the Deputy Mayor and it's sort of a whole lot of unknowns yet. Again, I think it said this at the governing body, but any Prime Minister that had a paper come before a cabinet this blurry and still a number of options not really fully explored, I'd say take it away and bring it back when it's a bit tidier. But I will be supporting Ken Turner's amendment if that's the only option we've been given.
Through the chair, maybe I can just highlight in the paper, there is an option D which talks about exactly what you said of...
It's not full, it's not fleshed out.
Yeah. So there are a number of drawbacks to that option, but it's definitely an option on the table, and we can provide more detail, but there is a summary there around the cost of road stopping, the time involved, and the fact that the process of road stopping has inherent cost because it's a legal process and has to go through the normal channels, and any money invested in that process would therefore not be available to actually solving the problem.
Anything else, Morris? No. So just to follow up from me on regards to, just to clarify that, so would that potentially be part of that case management, because it is done on a case-by-case basis, that consideration could be part of the case management?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an option there. Generally, we perceive that it wouldn't be the best option because it doesn't actually solve the problem of the slip and the access. All it does is transfer the responsibility more clearly. And when someone gets an encroachment license, they can have that same level of legal responsibility defined as well. So there are other mechanisms.
But can we get some answer on that a little bit? I mean, we're obviously not going to get it today, but that just seemed like quite a tidy solution for some of these cases.
Yeah, I don't think there's any argument with that. Ace, did you have anything else? No. Okay. Thank you, Morris. Mike.
Thank you. I have a question, but before I ask the question, the original recommendations really are quite revealing and worrying, and strike me as almost as if this council lives in a kind of parallel universe. And I guess, especially when it comes to costs, actually. But anyway, my question is in regard to the cost. A very similar situation arose immediately after the floods out west in Karikari Road and Lone Kauri Road, which were blocked off by 15 major slips. These were raw, big, tree trunk, rock type slips. And at the time, AT was unable to give these areas priority, so the people were virtually locked in. Fortunately, among them were contractors and people with the right gear. So they dug themselves out. And in the end, AT did the right thing and paid them a fair price, which they agreed to for their work. And that was $200,000 to move 15 major slips. Now, that works out as about $13,500 per slip. Here, we're talking about $173,000 average per works, and these slips are not going to be as challenging as the ones that completely blocked off the road. So I just wonder, when it comes to appointing a case officer and a case manager and a procurement specialist, let's hope that the specialist wasn't involved with figuring out this number. Are you confident that in this case, as an example, that we are getting value for money here?
No, thanks for the question. In response to that, there is an option E that is presented, which is that the landowners themselves would do the work, which is the normal way that access ways are installed. So there's nothing to preclude any landowner doing the work themselves through the normal process. And if they feel they can do that cost effectively, that's to be welcomed. In the case of the Karikari Road, that works was relating to the main road carriageway, not private access ways. And we were very appreciative of the work that the community did as they banded together. And then there was a second stage to that work where the main contractor came through and did some significant additional works to strengthen up the road and also build the retaining walls that were outside of the scope and scale of what the local community could do. But in this case, there's nothing to preclude a landowner doing the works themselves, and in fact that would be encouraged.
Anything else, Mike? Okay.
We should get those West End people to do the job rather than the usual suspects that we pay so much for.
Thank you, Mike. Desley.
Yeah, sorry to come back. I just want to be really clear that if I was to support Ken's amendment, that we're only limiting this to 5 million, which we've identified that we have, and there are no further costs to council. Is that correct? Not the precedent, because the precedent says non-precedent setting in the report, but just want to make sure.
Sorry, councillor, could you repeat that?
Well, okay, I'll ask that as a second question then, but I just want to make sure that if you support Ken's amendment, that it is a $5 million ring-fenced fund, and that's it. Correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, that was a yes, if those people who are online couldn't see the nodding of the head. And the second question, I think it is important because Councillor Williamson and I, who just called it out, but the report on page 55 says it non-precedent setting response to the storms. Can you confirm, because I don't see non-precedent setting in Ken's recommendations, and maybe it should be, but can you confirm your point 55 that this is a one-off non-precedent setting response to the storms, as you have mentioned in point 55 in the report?
So, councillor, I'm assuming we are looking at the entire amendment as well as including the adjustment from councillor Turner. So the point E talks about it being a limited to a one-off response provided on a no-fault, no liability basis, directly attributable to the North Island weather events. We are ensuring that there will be no intended precedent.
Thank you.
Christine?
I'm just wondering whether the mover of the amendment and the seconder would, for belts and braces purposes, have the inclusion of the non-precedent words being incorporated in a way that is unambiguous. Yes, it is, but I would just like everyone to be well aware that it is not your intention, through you, Chair, it is not your intention that this be precedent setting. So can you answer that for me now?
I would accept that.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions? Nothing on from online? Oh, Richard?
Well, it's just what I guess, and it is about, and I don't know if the 37 includes all properties, because there are many properties I know that have been looked at on the shore, for instance, that have been pushed back on, that are definitely road reserve. There's heaps in parks, reserves, healthy waters and water care land as well, but there are, so you're saying that this would open up the process to across the city to apply for this? Because how do we know that the 37 is the 37?
Through the chair, it's a very good question, councillor. The 37 have been identified by the Star Group. As say, we have had other properties or people come to us, homeowners come to us asking to be included in such a scheme. It is a challenge.
And would this include paper roads, because that's been a big issue as well?
Normally where there's a paper road and someone constructs a private access across the paper road, then that's the private responsibility to build it and maintain it.
Well, that comes back to my question around access. This isn't just about access. This is about other contributing factors that may not include access.
Through the chair, just identifying that the recommendations as they're set does include in D point 4, which talks about the damage and or risk is materially impacting access to the adjoining residential dwelling compared to access prior to the storm events. That probably is contrary to Councillor Turner's amendment, potentially, perhaps needs to be discussed.
And the other question would be, how will this be prioritized? So will it be kind of like the categorization program, which is a little bit, it hasn't been first come, first serve, but it obviously has been first, the people that get in early have been processed earlier, and then people have come later. And of course, a couple thousand are missing out. How would this process go? Would it be prioritized on access or size?
Our recommendation as officers is it's access, but again, it's a council decision. The detail we would need to resolve in terms of how we allocate who's prioritised and so on, and to what level.
Thank you. And the focus on capital, does that mean that people that don't have the support to do the operational things in the chair's rec, which is around geotech, design, consenting, things like that, if those people don't have the access to the funds for that part, I'm assuming they'll miss out on the capital part?
So as the recommendation is written, we would have to provide that support, but it is unbudgeted. It's OPEX rather than CAPEX, so we'd have to find that money from somewhere.
Right, so coming back to Councillor Williamson's point, is I'm concerned this goes well above what Transport Committee could be doing, because much like the other committees, we are approving unbudgeted spend, and it should be through governing body or budget committee. Is that accurate? Like if we go with the Councillor Turner's amendment, that would be contrary to what we're allowed to do through this committee. If there's suddenly unbudgeted spend that we're not providing for.
Through the chair, my understanding is that is correct. There'd need to be a recommendation to the governing body to approve unbudgeted spend.
So I guess that's a question. I don't know who that's a question for. And I guess this is the difficult thing to the mover and seconder of the amendment. We were not warned of this amendment until it came up on the screen, and I just haven't, we're going to give people false hope here if we support this amendment, because then it has got to go to a future governing body to get the funding to do the stuff to get to the capital, and that will be led by the mayor, who's not here right now. This is not So could I ask Councillor Turner, what is the process from here to get, because
You've lost me. We are sunk in.
Yep, so hang on, we'll bring you back. So Barry will try and explain.
And we might have the finance team come up and speak to it as well, but the 5 million is reallocation of our flood-related budget. Outside of that, 5 million is unbudgeted.
So I'm not trying to be tricky here. I'm just saying that we may end up in a situation where we have funded something that actually can't be done because we don't have the funding to, So I'm sorry, Councillor Turner, if I've lost you, but that's the facts on the table.
Yeah, just to confirm that, if there's a request for unbudgeted expenditure, that has to be approved by the governing body or go through the annual plan process via the budget committee. When I look at sort of resolution A here, and it's kind of very similar to what was in the sort of original recommendations, a lot of that is kind of using the existing storm recovery navigation service, the existing recovery office people to provide support, and we have people doing that. So to the extent that we can do some of that work with existing resources, the existing team helping out and those kind of things, maybe it's a bit of prioritising what's within that. If we can do that with an existing budget, and then we can always come back if we're short and there's a small OPEX funding gap that could come through governing body. So if you were to make a decision today, I guess the team would see what they can do with the existing resources, the existing team that they have to support this work. And if some of those OPEX costs, particularly as you get into consenting and pre-design work, where it gets to the more expensive stuff, that could come back to governing body if more OPEX is required at that point. But you could approve the other bits.
But with all due respect, and maybe this is to Councillor Turner, that is the opposite way. we can't do the other 5 million without knowing. This is really tricky way of giving people false hope here. This is like saying we'd fund just random capex without knowing or funding any of the pre-work.
What's proposed here is that the 5 million is available. It's been it's within the flood related budget at Auckland Transport, and it is using if there's an underspend in there in their confirmed budget, so that 5 million is available for works flood related. But if we're starting to look at things which are OPEX that can't be funded within available resources that council or AT have, then that is an issue and that needs to go to the governing body. Is that correct? Can I just ask Ross to confirm that, please?
So yeah, it feels like I've had 3 different answers to that. Sorry.
Yeah, so what we've got here is an existing capex budget that's within the delegation of this committee to reallocate that and apply it to a different purpose. There might be stuff that can be done within existing operating budgets, and there's probably a fair bit that can be done there. If additional OPEX budget is required, I guess the other way to look at it, and I guess before that bit was deleted, in that first A, if it was kind of funding some of that stuff out of that 5 million, that would be using some CapEx money to fund some operating costs. Normally we wouldn't support that and would have financial implications because that means rates versus debt funding. Given we've already set rates for this year, if that 5 million was unspent, it wouldn't change this year's rates. It's already been set. It would mean a debt saving. So in terms of in-year spend, it's probably the financial implications of spending a little bit of that unspent CapEx with one-off operating spend is probably a very minor financial implication. So yeah, it could probably, I would say that would be a reasonable, it wouldn't have a significant material financial impact. And if the committee wanted to decide that, I think that would be a reasonable approach.
Okay, but I'm still concerned that the people who don't have access to funds for the first part will miss out, and we'll only be able to fund the capital for those who've been able to fund their consents or geotech or design. Isn't that what Auckland Transport just said?
What I can say is, in a normal process, if someone wants to put in a access for their property, there's a certain number of fees they have to pay for encroachment licenses, for license to occupy, for consents and so on. So Auckland Transport would still need to cover those costs. And the original proposal was that would be charged against the 5 million available.
And I think if I could just comment, I mean, it is complicated, but we've had reporting from the staff to say that it's not a biggie. And it is, how long do we want to make these people wait for an answer one way or the other? Because that is what they are waiting for. And if the staff are telling us that we can move ahead with this, then I think for their sake, we do that if we can. If more money is needed, or whatever way this goes, if there is more money needed, then it has to come back to the governing body. But for their sake, I think we need to, one way or the other, make a decision today, and that we owe it to them to do that. So, any more questions, Richard?
No, and that's what I was exactly saying, Chair, but I just wasn't sure which option was the best for people to get it done fast, if we have to come back.
Okay. Honey.
Kia ora. Housing is quite a basic need, and we've got properties that were across the Rohe o Tāmaki that was impacted heavily. And I'm just wanting to hone in what type of engagement has mana whenua been directly in the Pacific area we're talking about, because over the past, I'm not quite sure how long this has been quartered or going in this time, I've heard about land possibly giving it for peppercorn delivery with $1. And you know, for us, the issue strong for me is te tiriti, and what engagement, if land is going to be sold, how it is, or given, that there must have been at least some engagement directly with mana whenua to those property owners. Two, I don't know the nuts and bolts around the policy directly within either council or Auckland Transport, but it's a basic need that we're talking about, which is housing. And the impact that has faced us is really devastating across the motu. So I'm hearing, and I need to take the confidence that it's not going to set precedents or non-presidential spacing. I don't want to get down into the actual 37 if they're Māori, just like Sayers was identifying how much of that 5 mil will get allocated to each one. I'm definitely here to ensure Māori outcome is upheld and te tiriti is delivered in partnership engagement and what that may look like. So basic question, has mana whenua been engaged directly with those property owners, let alone with yourselves?
Yeah, kia ora, Member Renata. In a general sense, across the recovery program, yes, Te Kaurau Maki and this Rohe part of the Waitaki Ranges area has been engaged on the program generally. In terms of the specifics around driveways and access, not specifically, but in terms of the road corridor.
Okay. Just one other, just a follow-up. So, in saying that, then if any indication of selling of the land that possible councillors are talking here, was it just a flippant space or was it a consideration to begin?
My understanding of the proposal was, yes, selling land within the road reserve, so only those limited situations related to access to a property, but acknowledge your point in terms of that would be a disposal of public land.
Sorry, just one more. So it's not going to be setting a precedent where a position has been forced into, yeah.
I don't think that's a part of the resolution that's before you before you now, Member Renata.
Okay, so we need to take a lunch break. I'm going to do one more question from Christine, and then we'll come back for Julie and Josephine after we've had our lunch break. So, Christine.
Thank you, Chair. And the context in which I asked my question is one where I really do want to commend Councillor Turner for trying to find a bespoke solution to the residents that have been through so much anxiety and trauma. But in terms of good process, my question is to the CEO. Do you feel we have had sufficient information to be able to make a decision on this amendment? And appreciating that people want an answer either way today, in an accountability sense, I want to know whether you feel all of the information is on the table, because I would like to be able to support this. But now there are questions around delegations, there are questions around perhaps precedent. Is this something that should be deferred today if there is insufficient information, or as our CEO and the only employee we have as councillors, do you feel comfortable with all the information we've received in order that we can progress this?
I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little unhappy. There is some untidiness here, and we would normally want to have in front of you a solution to the problem that considered everything fully and had all of the information, the ramifications, the costs and what have you, and we're clearly not in that situation. There's a but here though. I think we've all got to be mindful of the desperate need that some people have to get some solution in place here without too much undue delay. So it really, my guidance to you is that it really depends on what you agree today. If you agree that you are providing for $5 million to assist in this situation, but you are leaving it to us with certain guardrails to design this in a way that's sustainable in terms of precedent setting and the limitation of additional and further costs, then that's exactly what the staff and I will do. We will make sure that the scheme is designed to achieve that outcome. And in that context, I'm happy to proceed. If you want to get much more detailed and leave open-endedness in the resolutions here, then we've got a slightly different problem. But my encouragement to you is probably in that direction of letting us do the final detailed design around this if you're prepared to commit the $5 million that's available through the unspent transferred aspect of the storm recovery fund.
Thank you for your candid response. And I'm just wondering whether, if in order this can be affected, whether there are further delegations required in order that that could be achieved. But I really appreciate your response on that.
And I think other than Councillor's hunger, perhaps the lunch break gives us an opportunity just to talk with the mover and make sure that we're nice and tidy here in that regard.
Okay, so on that note, I hate dropping things in the middle of an item, but we are going to do that, and so we will break now until half an hour. Half an hour will give us plenty of time, so we'll come back here at 1:45. Thank you.